Welcome to this edition of Great Books, a lively discussion of a selection from the canon of exceptional literature. Here's your host, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Great Book Show. I'm Jack Hatfield. Our panel meets regularly to discuss important works of classic and modern literature. Today we're discussing a selection from Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Here's Maureen to tell us more about it.
Many of us know Jonathan Swift from his tale of giants and Lilliputians, which we read as children. That book, Gulliver's Travels, is actually not a children's book at all, but an adult satire on human nature and Enlightenment thought. Jonathan Swift lived in Ireland and England from 1667 to 1745, where, besides working as a minister of an Irish church, he was very involved politically. He used satire as a weapon in many of his books and pamphlets to critically lambast politics and ideas, but he did it in a playful and funny way. In Swift's masterpiece, Gulliver's Travels, a British surgeon and sea captain sails to 4 remarkable kingdoms. Book 4, titled A Voyage to the Country of the Winhams, is the subject of today's discussion. In this work, Gulliver, victim of a mutiny at sea, finds himself on an island populated by 2 races. One he sees as a race of hideous, deformed, human-like savages called Yahoos. He is taken in by the second, a race of serene, horse-like creatures called Winhams, who are intelligent and who have set up a peaceful society based solely on reason. Gulliver tries to describe British society to his hosts, but they have no conception of greed, warfare, injustice, or lying. Gulliver is eventually exiled by the Winhams he admires and emulates and returned to England. Jack?
Thanks, Maureen. My first question is Swift trying to portray the Winham society as the ideal, as the perfect society, in contrast to ours?
The ideal of the rational society, not necessarily the perfect society, I'd say.
I think Gulliver is trying to portray it as the best society. I think Swift is writing satire and making points both about the Yahoo society or human society and the Winham society. Because the Winham society, it doesn't have any passion. Right?
That was the point that came home to me, is that it's so perfectly rational, which is interesting to say during the Age of Enlightenment, that it has a downside because you marry for convenience and interchange wives and children if they need an extra player, that the rationality is such that it takes the passion out of things.
But doesn't he talk about love?
Yeah, there ain't none.
Not the Winham Society.
The Winham society.
Not in the Winham
Women's
Society. Not
yeah.
the Winham Society.
But he does mention love, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
But on one person, the nag, he's talking about they don't have any love.
The old nag.
But the old nag had love for him.
Yes.
That didn't really fit, I didn't think.
Well, I just bring it up because it's not, love is not rational.
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah. Well, I think he's taken human nature, the man's capacity to do good, man's capacity to do evil, and puts them in both those groups. And he doesn't, the Yahoos, Gulliver doesn't defend the Yahoos when, I don't know how to pronounce the horses. Winhams, yeah. The Winhams are always comparing him to the Yahoos, and he doesn't defend himself, his nature. He goes along with them.
But he was shocked when he realized that he looked at a Yahoo person and realized that he was perfectly human, right? And that he therefore was a Yahoo. And he was struck with horror by that. And he couldn't deny it once he saw himself in comparison to them.
The Winham Society had some real limitations. For one, it existed here in a environment where there was no unfulfilled wants. I mean, they had all the food they could want and housing and everything. So unlike back in England, where they were contrasting it, you have a completely different.
Shame on the country that can't feed its people or its citizens. Do you remember that line?
Yeah.
I thought that was a great line.
But you know,
Their needs were so minimal. I mean, I don't recall them. Did they have art? Did they have?
No.
Did they have any literature? Well, they had no literature, but and no
Yeah, music,
creative.
I think they had
music.
yeah.
Courtship, love, presents, jointures, settlements have no place or terms whereby to express them in their language. Young couple meet and are joined merely because it is the determination of their parents and friends. So it's so completely rational. The joy comes out of everything. They don't even have words to express lies or love or anything that's other than rationality.
Anything that is motivated by passion or by emotions.
But they were peaceful.
Right.
And so you might say that it's a somewhat joyful kind of state of mind.
okay, I'm going to take issue with you because they also said that there were no words for power, government, war, law, or punishment, and 1,000 other things.
Yes.
Okay, but the reason there was no want was because when the Yahoos first came onto the island and they were taking over the island, there were so many of them that the Wyndhams just killed all the adults and just allowed 2 children per Wyndham family to survive. Okay, so the reason there was no competition for food is because they went to war, whether they called it war or not, and killed all the adult Yahoos.
But they didn't see the Yahoos as being rational creatures, so they were sub-rational, so they were animals.
But the
So they
realize
were animals. I mean, so it's really culling the herd in a sense.
I realize that's the way they saw it.
Yeah, right. No, exactly.
But I'm
right.
sure the Yahoos, who
Saw it a little
were
differently.
rational and not the barbarians that the children turned into, they wouldn't have seen it that way.
And they were clever. They had guile.
Yahoos or
the Yahoos.
They had what? I'm sorry.
Guile.
Yeah, but like an animal, or monkeys have guile. But
Yeah, but you have to remember that the reason the Yahoos, I believe, were such barbarians was because they didn't have any parents to teach them. That first generation after the parents were killed were just children raised to be animals by the Wyndhams. And in that kind of society where you don't have any rules, you don't have anybody teaching you anything other than
become
to pull a
feral.
cart.
You become feral.
You become
Exactly.
feral.
Yeah.
So the reason the Yahoos were like that, I think, is because the Wyndhams treated them like that.
That's why they were so surprised that he was a Yahoo and that he was a good one.
let's talk about reason for a minute, because he's supposed to be the perfect reasoned society, and you didn't have to ever have discussion on something because everyone immediately saw the truth and they all agreed upon it, which I don't think is possible. But then later on, they had all this debate about whether to throw Gulliver out.
That seemed a little inconsistent.
was
I thought so
rational.
too.
That was inconsistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was rational, that the rest of them saw him as a threat and as a Yahoo, and therefore he should go. It wasn't an emotional decision that, hey, he's our friend and he did some great things with us, but it was purely rational.
But didn't his master make a pitch for keeping him?
Tried
I mean,
to,
I think that the idea, this was the satire too, although it wasn't consistent. The Enlightenment idea was that reason is pure, it's universal, and it commands immediate assent from any rational person. Once the argument is laid out, you
So
immediately.
was he satirizing the Enlightenment?
I think he was. I think he was
saying
satirizing.
that reason is not the end all and be all? It seems like he was.
Or
Exactly.
at least that idea that once
It was so
the
unusual
reasonable
at that time.
once the reasonable once the reasonable solution was put forward, everyone would assent to it immediately,
Right.
which is not what happened in this particular case. That was the inconsistency.
Or he was sloppy.
Or he was sloppy. Or maybe his master was being influenced by him. That was my thought, too.
But the Wyndhams also supposedly said that there was no word for opinion, that people didn't have
An
opinions,
opinion, no
right?
opinion.
And this is definitely a case where the master had the opinion that it was okay to
It
keep
was seeping
Gulliver.
in.
It was interesting
Yeah, it's
that he
corrupting
went
the
from
society.
the master to my master. Did you pick that up?
No.
You know, I looked at this whole thing too as Stockholm Syndrome, right?
Yes.
What kind of syndrome?
Stockholm Syndrome. He got
That's
taken
interesting.
in by, criminals in the
Yeah.
Stockholm Syndrome and saw their point of view to the point that he hated the Yahoos, didn't want to go back to England anymore.
No.
Just wanted to live with them and saw that they were perfect. And that's exactly what the syndrome is. So.
Yeah.
And he that society kind of wrecked Gulliver. I mean,
It did.
he went back and he didn't talk to his wife for years and hated everybody around him, and he couldn't stand their smell, and that's
It made him unfit for human society.
yeah.
It ruined him. I
That's what
agree.
pure reason
And I think
does.
that was an important part of the story. Yeah. I mean, if it had ended with him just coming back to England, I think we would have missed that part of it.
yeah.
Okay, but I thought it was funny in that last chapter after he got back to England and he's saying what happened and why he was writing this book. Okay, now his whole stance is that he's not going to lie, right?
Right,
Lying is
truth.
terrible. He's going to tell the truth. Everyone should write travel books that tell nothing but the truth. And then he says his reason for not telling, like, the king where this island was, right? He said that if that happens, like if people come upon an island, they're going to take it over, they're going to enslave the inhabitants, they're going to kill people, and they're going to go back, and other people are going to come, and that people won't have their freedom anymore. And then he gives a whole paragraph that says, but England isn't like that, and they have justice. Right after he skewered all the lawyers, right? He says, oh no, there's justice in England, and England is fair. And it was just, but that's a lie. Is he saying that to get his book published?
Why is it a lie?
It's a contradiction.
It's a contradiction, yes.
It's a contradiction.
Yes.
Because he spent a couple of chapters in here
We know
saying
it's a
how
contradiction.
terrible
Right.
the British society was.
Yes.
How terrible the lawyers were, how terrible the leaders were. How
Well, we
they-
all agree that there was a contradiction there. Right?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Why,
So maybe
Well-
he didn't see it as a contradiction.
Yeah, I mean, everything was bad.
just
I mean,
thought it
the way human society was organized, the way any society is organized other than the Wyndham society is inferior, vastly inferior. Maybe it was just comparable. In other words, this is the least bad society. Now, I cannot point to something in the
See,
book
it's-
that supports that.
I
So
think
can't
we're
point.
getting
Okay.
confused between Gulliver and Swift, because even though Gulliver seems to contradict himself, Swift is saying that although we can point out that contemporary society is hypocritical, blah, 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 and that reason should triumph in situations where it does not now, switching completely the other way is equally flawed. And that's Swift talking, not Gulliver.
David, help
And
me
maybe,
out. How
maybe
do
the
you
other
make
piece
the
of it has to
distinction?
do. Oh, please.
How do you make the distinction between Gulliver and Swiss?
Oh,
Swift.
because
Gulliver
Gulliver
is Swift.
argues
No.
Gulliver argues that the Wyndhams are wonderful, and then all of a sudden his humanity leaks out, saying that, gee, people should be in love to get married, or certainly not Britain is evil. So in his contradictions to his espoused values, we see Swift making fun of both sides of the argument, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the implication of what you're saying is that Swift is also saying that that people really can't live this way.
Right.
I mean,
That's
no matter
right.
People can't live like
people can't live this way. I mean, Gulliver wanted to be always truthful, wanted to live up to the ideals as he
Right.
saw them of the Wyndham Society, and even he couldn't do it.
Why do you think Swift picked the Wyndham Society's one is no passion? Why did he pick that and no books? of all the things you could choose to set up a society, as a matter of fact, Swift did in other chapters, but why did he pick no passion and no books, no literature?
I can only speculate as to the passion thing, but it goes back to what we've been talking about and Maureen talked about earlier in terms of, in her introduction, that part of this is a satire of Enlightenment ideas. And one of the Enlightenment ideas was that passion is what screws up human society. And so, the one thing that if you're going to have an ideal society, you have to eliminate passion. But I'm not sure about the books piece.
You would think that a reasonable society has a life of the intellect and writes a lot of books, but they didn't write, so. But the other idea of back to nature and Rousseau and the natural man and all that would be the Yahoos, and he's saying that doesn't work either.
That doesn't work either, yeah.
Was there any good in the Yahoos?
No.
Well, they certainly had passion.
At all?
They certainly had passion. I mean,
No.
remember the scene where the female Yahoo sees him bathing and throws herself at him, and he's completely repulsed.
Yeah, and he's horrified because then he realizes that they consider him a Yahoo too.
Right, yes.
Right? And he just hates the society so much by that time.
So we don't have an answer. I certainly don't on books and literature, and I don't really know passion. Are they?
They also weren't curious, because when these first Yahoos came ashore, they didn't know whether they rose out of the sea or out of the land. It's just there were too many of them, and so they killed them. But a human would be curious, right?
Right.
And try and find out, and they just didn't have any of that in them.
Well, the master was very interested in the story of this different society. So,
but I was wondering if that was like the idea of like the Garden of Eden, where there's all good, and then they learn evil. I think the master was learning evil, what evil was, from Gulliver, because he had no conception of these vices, or why he didn't go to war.
Well, then logically he would be contaminated.
Yes, and I was wondering if he was being contaminated because he all of a sudden had an opinion that Gulliver shouldn't be exiled and didn't go along in his way of thinking with everyone else, although he did agree with it, agree to let Gulliver go, but I thought that was like a chink in society.
Of, humanity.
And the thing was, he really didn't like Gulliver as much after he found out how bad the Yahoo society was in England and in the rest of the world.
I didn't get that.
It really disgusted him.
I didn't get that sense.
I didn't know.
I got that sense because he said, I can see the Yahoos being brutal here, but I can't see how, with a tinge of reason, what you people outside of the island do with that reason and just turn it into something horrible.
He was also.
I thought that just made it. I thought he was just more puzzled. I think that part of what speaks maybe against that a little bit was the end. I mean, remember he allowed Gulliver to stand in his presence? I can't remember what the thing was.
Yeah.
Remember, and he treated him as not an equal, obviously, but he treated him as something more than just
a Yahoo,
an intelligent pet. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, he was also saying several times that he couldn't reconcile the description of England with the guy who was standing in front of him, who seemed to be an intelligent person.
But there was also a quote in there where he said, the master continually pointed out terrible things about myself that I never considered before.
Right.
So the master was looking at the description of the Yahoo society in England and looking at him differently, looking at Gulliver with different eyes, saying, you're capable of this?
Didn't Gulliver at some point essentially admit that he was giving a skewed portrayal? Am I misremembering that? Nobody else is remembering it, so I must be misremembering. Because something like that he was giving a kind of a skewed portrayal because essentially he was focusing on everything bad.
He said that.
Did he say something like that? Yeah. Yeah. He didn't focus on the things like art, like
Right.
you know.
Well, when called upon to explain it, he learned some things about himself that weren't evident to him
Yes.
previously. So the self-knowledge of the rational man points out his foibles. So there's something to be said for the rational approach, but maybe the middle way is what Swift is suggesting.
Oh, definitely.
Because the
middle way.
dispassionate doesn't make it.
Right. The yahoos are nothing but their feelings and passion and
Right.
vices, and the Whitums don't have any of that. So there has to be a happy medium.
He makes the point that the Yahoos go to war with other types of people, and then he said they even fight among them. They go to war against each other.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't have another battle against someone else.
Right.
That's right.
That's right.
And
They
the
start their own war.
politicians
You're right.
make a diversion of scandal somewhere else to hide their own rapaciousness. I like that one.
They're on page 208. It's not important to go there, but said friendship and benevolence are the two principal virtues among the Winhams. And these are not confined to particular objects, but universal to the whole race. But that, you know, when Gulliver goes back to England, those are two things he did not take with him. I mean, he was like we were saying earlier, that he was very much against everybody around him, and friendship and benevolence was not something part of his character. It was almost destroyed out of him.
It was,
Except
yeah.
for his horses and the
Right.
groom in the stable.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah, he and the horses have conversations.
And the way he walked.
Yeah.
Both of those
the way you walk.
qualities are non-rational too. Friendship and harmony, or whatever.
Benevolence.
Unless
There's
it's
a little emotion attached to that,
Yeah.
isn't there?
Okay,
Yeah.
but how strong
Well-
a friendship is it? Is if someone dies, you don't care. You just
Right.
go about, you find some place to bury them and then go about your life as usual without even missing them. And how strong a friendship is that?
well, that's
Well, it's not-
Swift
it's not
in there
human
saying that
friendship.
there's a flaw on both sides, the purely rational and the purely emotional.
I think in some societies that's not it. That's the thing to do. They're gone, so they're gone.
Get
And
on
I've
with
known
it.
people like that, so and they're good people. So anyway, what we've coming down to the end here. What did you get out of the book that we haven't discussed? Or what portions really grabbed you?
I was starting to say before we started the taping that there was one aspect of it that really hit home to me, that didn't the last time I read it, and that was how thoroughly this really seemed thoroughly misanthropic. Well, there were two aspects of it. One is that this seemed thoroughly misanthropic. I mean, I didn't really get. I mean, Swift's satire here is really savage, I thought. The other thing was, I mean, he may have been making the point as we were talking about that either extreme is not the way to conduct one's life, but he never portrayed anything in the middle. He never gave us anything that suggested that there is a way of balancing these extremes. They were just the extremes, and it was savage. And the second thing, which is related to the first, had to do with how miserable and unfit for human society Gulliver was once he came back. I mean, the contempt that he showed even for his own children, the contempt and the scorn that he showed even for his own children, and his inability to tolerate and his wife, his inability to tolerate their physical presence in the room for months. It was sad. I mean, there was a real sadness to the end of the book, I thought.
Is
and
he
that had
saying, be careful not to be brainwashed by David Hume or something like that? Is that the point that he was trying to make? That if you're too rational, you become misanthropic?
Do you know what David Hume said when he said that that he would follow his very skeptical philosophy and the rationality and everything? He would get to a point essentially where he felt so like the next step was to really feel totally miserable. What he would do is he would stop and he'd go play backgammon. He would go have a beer with his friends, and that's the only response. The only response is to put it aside.
Hume wasn't a strict rationalist. I mean, he had a very strong place
for sentiments,
emotions,
yeah,
sentiments, all that.
yeah.
You know what got me was that it seemed that that the only way that this perfect society could be, or this society, isolated, no books, no love, no emotions, and that seemed to me very sad.
It did.
Yeah, it's just boring.
The Wyndhams were the 17th century Vulcans. I mean, from Star Trek. I mean, they had that is a Wyndham society.
Yeah.
Did we talk about human nature at all? He gives all of the bad things to the Yahoos. Where's the good?
Well, Pedro, the ship captain, he was a good person, and even
That's
Gulliver
interesting.
saw him
Yeah.
as
Oh,
a
yeah.
good
That's a
person
good
and was
point.
willing to talk to him.
That's a good
So
point.
there was one redeeming person in
Yes.
the whole book.
Who
But
was
they-
sensitive to Gulliver, and
Yeah.
But they threw him off the ship.
Yeah, they still move on.
Who?
What?
Pedro, the ship,
Don Pedro.
who took him to Lisbon
Oh, at the end.
at
You're
the
right.
end.
Yeah,
at
the
the
guy-
very
yeah,
end.
yeah,
I was thinking of it.
Okay, no,
Not the
Gulliver
first,
got thrown off
yeah.
the ship.
So maybe he is the one example of the middle road. Maybe in the book.
Yeah. Anyhow. Great read.
It was lyrical. That's what I liked about it. It was fun to read, and some of those long lists of vices, and right in the middle of it, he'd put a zinger in there. I got a kick out of it. I thought it was a lot of fun.
I did too.
I have the opposite opinion, but I just thought his satire was kind of coarse and sophomoric and just kind of,
What was the
yawn.
downside then?
Fun to talk about. So,
I just loved the way he skewered British society with doctors and lawyers and rulers, and he just tore into them. And
Yeah.
we didn't discuss that, but if you read it, it's hysterical.
I thought it was interesting as the Wyndham Society was a socialist society, pure socialism.
Right.
And at first when I read it, I thought, well, is he proposing that the ideal society is socialist? But then reading further into it, I
Not so
don't
good.
think so.
It was not a society I would like to live in.
Yeah, and it couldn't
They
exist in
wouldn't.
the
They
real
wouldn't
world.
like you to live in it either.
Yes, they would.
I wonder why he picked horses.
That was the question I
Yeah.
had too. Does
Yeah.
anybody have a sense of that?
Yeah.
Well,
They're not smart animals,
We'll
are
have to leave that unanswered.
yes, we'll
Yes,
have
we
to
will.
cogitate over it. So thank you all. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time as we discuss another great selection. As Aristotle said, the best way to learn is to get together in small groups and discuss great ideas.